sixth form college in Galston, and she's been speaking to some of the students there.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a first year student at East Norfolk and I'm studying politics, religious studies and sociology. I'd say the most interesting political issues for me are gender issues, but I am interested in social issues generally.
My name is Rory Allyward. I'm a second year student at East Norfolk. The political issues that concern me are more like global politics or just studying like the theory of politics. I think that's where I'm the most interested in.
My name's Amber and I am a first year at East Norfolk. I study sociology, psychology and politics, and the political issues I'm most concerned about is poverty in our country.
Hi, I'm Riley. I'm a second year and I'm concerned about global politics, social issues, cultural issues, pretty much everything really.
I'm Amelia. I'm a first year student at East Norfolk. I study politics, English language and history, and the political issues I'm most concerned with is largely political philosophy, which is what I find really interesting about politics.
How much do you know about the local elections rather than kind of global politics? What have you heard about the local elections, and can you tell me what anyone's sort of manifesto promises are?
The stuff that I know about the local elections tends to be from the leaflets that have come through the door, and I've sat and read them just out of curiosity. And a lot of stuff that you see on social media. I know that there's like one specific Labour candidate, I can't remember where in the country, but he has a TikTok account that I see quite regularly, and so I know that his election promises about, I think he's doing some stuff with infrastructure where they live, and so that's kind of the stuff that I know about it.
Rory, my knowledge of the local elections, especially in my area, is mostly limited, probably because there's a lack of political local interest in my area. But there is one political candidate close to my area, and he focuses a lot more on like the community and infrastructure, and I think that's something that is really commendable. And if I could vote for him, I would have voted for him. Yeah.
Amber, I know quite limited about the local elections. I find I haven't seen many leaflets or anything in my local area, and I think that's kind of a problem. I don't think people know enough about local elections, and a very limited amount of people actually vote in them, so not a lot gets done.
If I'm honest, don't really know much about the local elections. I'm Riley, by the way. There's not much reason really to be interested in them, I don't feel. I don't think anything's really going to change around here at all.
Amelia, like everyone else, I don't know too much in detail. I think it's because there is an obvious lack of interest in local elections. I think people are not feeling that is having a massive impact on their day-to-day lives. They don't really know what that's about, so I think people tend to kind of brush it off, because what difference does that really make? It's not the same high-profile election as the general election, so people don't tend to vote, which is why I don't really feel like I know enough about it, because people just don't care.
Rory, you said that there's a lack of interest in politics in your area. Tell me why you think that.
I think it's probably because there's a lack of interest in certain parties. Probably, I'm not entirely 100% sure, but I feel like it's probably because there's generally a lack of interest even in general elections. But I would be surprised if the majority of people in the area even knew their MP, and I think that's really worrying. And I think especially with local elections, I'm not even me, for example, I'm quite interested in politics, but I'm not 100% sure how local elections work. I don't know even if there's many candidates. Like even for example, the local Labour Party or the CLP is very, very limited in the amount of youth that are involved in CLP at the moment. I'm not even involved, but I just think that's really that's sad, and I'm not 100% sure why, but I feel like it should be improved, because community politics is quite important, I think. Yeah.
How many of you can vote? Can any of you vote? What sort of ages are you?
Well, I'm 17 recently, so no, I can't vote yet, unfortunately.
I'm 17.
Yeah, I'm also 17.
Yeah, I'm still 17.
I'm 18. I voted in the Labour leadership elections, but still waiting for my proper vote.
So if a politician, either a local election candidate or somebody in national politics, was going to win your vote, what one thing would they have to promise you to get you to actually back them with your vote?
I think for me at the moment, the most pressing issue, and the thing that would matter to me the most to get my vote, would have to be measures around climate change and how the government is going to deal with climate, because it's the thing that's going to affect me and any of my future children and anybody else at the moment, I think.
I think regardless of the failings of electoral politics in the past, I think it is important to vote. And if I did have to vote, it would be for candidates that were promising like significant systemic change in regards to poverty and bridging class divides, gender divides, race divides, to just improve the lives of most people in the country, or as many people as possible. Yeah.
For me, it would be people who provide actual structure to what they want to do and building something that can actually help the community actively instead of just a bunch of waffle that doesn't actually get done.
So, well, to win my vote, I suppose, like people said, climate change is a big issue. Also investment into infrastructure, local investment, national investment, less funding cuts for things like the NHS, less funding cuts for all public services, really.
I think, yeah, if someone was to win my vote, they'd have to promise real systemic change for a lot of widespread issues, because if they're not able to critique the system that they're running under, then I don't think they'd be able to get anything major done. Like, everything that has so far led to this point has been under our current system, and I think all politicians need to take a look at what they're kind of operating under and the assumptions that they're making, and they need to kind of challenge those in order to move on to a better future.
You mentioned there a lot about environment, gender issues. I mean, how do you feel about the people that represent us at the moment, particularly perhaps older politicians?
I don't feel particularly represented by older politicians. I especially don't feel represented by the lack of female representation in Parliament, and they don't understand the issues of young people necessarily. It's very distant from us. I think if there is not change now, we're going to run out of time, and things are just going to, I mean, they're all pretty bad, but they are going to turn for the worst, and there is going to be no turning back, and that's going to, it makes you not want to think of the future, not want to think of having children, not want to think about what life you could lead, because it just feels like it's going to come to an end inevitably.
I think if electoral politics are going to work, they are going to have to start integrating younger people, more representative people of the country. And I feel like to challenge like these old systems of power that instill like prejudices, and even which have allowed the climate crisis to like accelerate to the level that it has now. I feel like there's going to have to be a huge shift in not only the people that are in power, but also the ideas that they bring with the new social context that they exist in. New ideas will come, and if the younger people are in power, they will have more influence.
I personally feel very underrepresented, especially by our MPs. Most of them are private school educated and are Eton educated and aren't from working class backgrounds and aren't from areas such as Great Yarmouth, which is a strongly deprived area. I think there's a lack of empathy in politics, and especially where it comes to people who rely on benefits or rely on free school meals. They aren't understood, and there's a big divide between the people who make decisions for us and us.
Like everyone else said, I do feel underrepresented. I do feel like there is sort of a clique who went to Oxbridge and Eton who all sort of know each other and things like that. And I don't know, it's almost undemocratic when the same sort of circles of people, they work at a bank, then they go into politics, and they work at a bank again, sort of thing. There's no representation for ordinary people, really.
Yeah, I think everyone said it pretty well. It's hard to feel represented and that you've got a hope for the future when the people in power are so clearly not worried about your lives. They don't have the need to see 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years into the future, because they're not necessarily going to feel the brunt of the actions that they're putting into place right now. So it is hard to kind of find representation in people that just don't have to live with what they're doing.
You mentioned things like the environment there, stuff like, I mean, environment, transport. What kind of things would you like to see changed in the future? What sort of direction would you like things to take?
Obviously, there has to be change from people as well as the government, you know, recycling more, saving water and stuff, but there should be more government initiatives to encourage this. And also, I think a lot of the kind of environmentally friendly alternatives to living at home and is good for middle and upper class people that can afford to do it, but for a lot of working class people it's just not an option, especially for people on universal credit that are kind of stretching it to get the money around anyway. There should be more help from the government to help people live environmentally friendly that can't afford it.
I think there definitely has to be like a top-down approach to how we tackle the climate crisis. Obviously, there should be individual responsibility when it comes to what we should do, when we should recycle, but it comes similarly to the COVID crisis, where it's the responsibility when it's pushed too much on the individual, it then becomes the problem of the population rather than the failings of the government or the failings of the system. And with climate crisis, it is a failing of the system quite clearly.
I think the climate crisis should be handled honestly, and I don't think it should be anything to do with lobbying or private funding or giving this contract to this person because they're friends with them. I think it should be something that's not motivated by other means. It should be motivated about saving our planet and protecting our environment, and not something that's going to be led by people who won't be here when everything's on fire and everything's going wrong and our planet is in disrepair.
I think Rory made a good point about the focus on individual responsibility. There's an encouragement to recycling things when oftentimes when you do recycle it just ends up in a landfill anyway. The approach should be much more top-down, especially also international approach, different governments coming together and collaborating. Because if we just all recycle, that's not going to change the system or the structure or anything. It's just going to make us feel a bit better about ourselves, sort of thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there is a really harmful misdirection of blame when it comes to the climate crisis, where the blame is being put on the individual and their own actions within their home or their lives or whatever, when it's kind of masking the critique that we should be making of the people in charge and the system overall. Some changes I'd like to see are like free public transportation, like subsidies for cleaner energy, stuff like that. I think we should be able to really attack the source of the problem rather than the individual. So yeah, it shouldn't be the responsibility of every single person to make their own changes, when it should be the overall thing that you're living under that should be able to encourage you to live that better life that you want to, but you can't.
People are quite optimistic coming out of the COVID pandemic, and this is like, oh, this is the final crisis. But I feel like there's always going to be a crisis. There's always going to be an economic crisis. There's going to be the looming threat of climate change. This isn't like a cynical point. I do genuinely believe that our generation is the generation that will, with new coming social contexts, we will have new ideas that will change the world. I know how corny that sounds, but I do genuinely have that optimism.
That's a really nice view. I wish I could have that. I mean, I've kind of we've obviously all grown up in like a climate of looming destruction. Really, it's like we're increasing in poverty. The climate crisis is going to destroy the world, and like I feel like we were promised a future when we were younger, and we are now realizing that we are not going to get given it by the people in charge, and we're going to have to change things actually if we're going to get what we want. I personally have mourned for the future that I thought I was going to have when I realized that climate and things like that were real problems that people just weren't going to face unless we forced them to. So yeah, I really like that optimism. Sorry about that.
How seriously do you think young people's views are taken by politicians? I mean, bearing in mind that only one of you in this group can vote, do you feel that people are kind of waiting till you turn 18 to listen?
I don't think young people are taken too seriously. I mean, I am for the voting age being lowered to 16, especially because I think a lot of people my age don't think they need to be involved in politics or have a political education, because they feel as though their voice isn't going to matter anyway. Like, what is the point in learning about politics if you can't even be properly involved until you're 18? And I think it just creates misinformation for like older people, but two, just creates a feeling for young people that they don't need to be involved and that their opinions don't matter.
I think although our right to vote is obviously so important, but I feel like that our political power shouldn't just stop at the vote. We should have other outlets, and yeah, we should have other outlets and platforms to voice our opinions. I'm not sure if social media is the best place. I'm not sure that's a controversial discussion, but I don't know, there should be other ways for us to platform and voice our opinions, whether that be through protest or yeah.
I think that our generation, Generation Z, are very powerful, and I think we can make lots of change, and I think we have the motivation and drive to do that, and maybe more so than other generations have, but we're often shut down and called snowflakes and attacked and told we don't know better and told that we'll become more conservative when we get older, when maybe that's not the truth. I think people are very educated, and I think people think more individually now and can see the bigger picture, and we're able to have a political education if we choose to, but that's something that is restricted a lot by the older generations.
I think one interesting thing about age and politics is if you look at the last election, the majority of under 45s didn't vote for the Conservatives, but they won a landslide. So this probably leads to a lot of people feeling like they haven't voted for this government at all. And it sort of creates a divide between the majority of if the majority of working people haven't voted for the government, but they're still in total power, it's going to lead to a huge sort of disillusionment with politics.
I think young people are definitely not as represented in politics as they should be. I think having the voting age at 18 and having very restricted political platforms until that point creates a wave of disillusionment with kind of the political system before they've even reached the voting age. So you're kind of trying to claw back voters from the wave of people that you've just said you don't matter. So I think we, like Rory said, we need different platforms. We need awareness of those platforms, like protests, like petitions, like being able to speak to your representatives and have your voice heard. That is kind of the way that we need to move forward. We need to make these platforms accessible to young people and have them known that they can make a difference before they have the vote.
It's probably a bit difficult to say, but looking forward into the future, what do you think Norfolk will be like when you sort of inherit politics, I suppose, and what sort of problems do you think your generation will be faced with?
I think generally we'll obviously have the problems of climate change and institutionalised problems like institutionalised racism, but I think within Norfolk specifically, I think we'll continue on with our problems with poverty, especially like we all live in Great Yarmouth or in Lowestoft, which are both deprived places. And every time I go down to like the city centre, not the city centre, the town centre, all the shops are closed, people are unemployed, there are more homeless people when I go down there, and I don't see that improving with local government particularly.
Yeah, I think our area, specifically Great Yarmouth, is quite a deprived area, and I don't see that changing.
I think that we're going to be dealing with this lack of industry that just keeps being stripped away. We don't have a lot of shops or anything. We really depend on summer work. That is like holiday work. It's temporary. People depend a lot on universal credit, and that's not because I think people think people on benefits are lazy, and that's not the case. It's just there's a lack of work. There's lack of industry. We have very little things. When you look at apprenticeships, we see very little over here, and we get told to look a lot further, and that's all contributing to the fact that there's so many rising things of poverty and food banks, and to the point where it's nearly at disrepair, because where do we go from there? And since 2011 there's 3,000 times more food banks being used, or people who need to use food banks, and it's not fair, and it's something that is just getting worse and worse, and how far will that go in the future, I think is a big question.
Yeah, I think in areas like Yarmouth and Lowestoft there's sort of been a spiral, because the less industry and opportunities there are, the more young people move to cities like London or Norwich or wherever. And because of how recently they've become quite safe seats, the government have no need to really focus on these areas at all. So they're not going to do anything, and it's going to continue to get worse. Young people are going to move away. It's just going to have an ageing population here as well, and nothing's going to really improve at all.
I think as a young person looking towards the future of Norfolk, it's not a bright future, I don't think, from where we're standing. I think we're going to continue to struggle with deprivation, with lack of industry, with unemployment, with homelessness, and I think those problems are just going to get worse if we keep addressing them like we are. And like looking towards that, it's kind of fostering a kind of a feeling of discontent or anger. I think personally I'm quite angry looking to the future, and I'm seeing all of this ruin where people are just not caring at the moment about what is going to happen in the future and what we're going to be left to deal with. So it's not exactly hopeful, but it is what it is, and if we keep on this track, we can't pretend that it isn't going to be horrible.
A future generation of voters. We heard from Emily, from Rory, also Amber, Riley and Amelia, who are all 16, 17 or 18-year-olds who attend the East Norfolk Sixth Form College in Galston. They were speaking to our political reporter Joe Thewlis in the run-up to next Thursday's local elections day. Kaylee, I don't know if you remember when you were at sixth form. I just about remember, but I don't think I was